You're listening to the Business for Good podcast, the show where you'll hear inspirational stories about companies making money by solving some of the world's most pressing problems. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and I'm glad you've joined us. Welcome, friend, to episode number 147 of the Business for Good podcast. I'm glad that so many of you got so much out of the last episode with Daily Harvest founder Rachel Drury. Thanks for writing in about it. It was definitely an inspirational story and one that resonated with me given the tremendous highs and very deep lows Rachel discussed in her journey to bringing Daily Harvest to hundreds of millions in revenue today. And the episode was especially favorable for me personally since the company sent a box of meals to my home afterward, which I have been enjoying ever since. Now, speaking of inspirational stories, this episode is certainly no different. That's because not everyone gets a second chance at life. But Inna Braverman got just that and is using her second chance to try to solve one of humanity's most pressing problems, how we are going to power our civilization without destroying the planet. She was born in Chernobyl, Ukraine. When she was only 2 weeks old, the nuclear disaster nearly took her life. When Inna's mom found her blue and unresponsive from the pollution spewed from the damaged reactor, she used her nursing skills to revive her baby and miraculously keep her alive long enough for paramedics to arrive. A few years later, the Bravermans moved to Israel, where Inna would grow up to be a translator at an energy company in her early 20s. But as she learned more about the failed efforts to capture the energy of ocean waves, Inna wondered if there might be a better way. This wondering led Inna to found her own company and start making some waves of her own. In this episode, we dive into the world of renewable energy with a focus on the innovative efforts of Eco-Wave Power, an Israeli startup seeking to revolutionize clean energy production as we know it. Founded by Inna when she was 24 years old, Eco-Wave Power is harnessing the energy of ocean waves to generate sustainable electricity from onshore locations. Now at age 37, Inna has led the company to the forefront of the renewable energy sector. Eco-Wave's Power's cutting-edge technology captures and converts the natural motion of waves into usable electricity, offering a viable and environmentally friendly alternative to traditional fossil fuels. Unlike many offshore wave energy systems, Eco-Wave Power's approach involves attaching their wave energy converters to existing human-made structures like breakwaters and piers. This onshore method simplifies maintenance and reduces costs while maximizing energy output. Already, the company has installations at several locations, including one at the Port of Los Angeles. The company went public in the United States in 2021 with an IPO on the NASDAQ. You can check out their symbol, which is WAVE, W-A-V-E, and hasn't had to raise any additional money since. Throughout this episode, we'll explore Inna's journey from company inception to its current status as a pioneering force in the renewable energy industry. Eco-Wave Power is not only contributing to the global shift towards sustainable energy, but is also demonstrating the potential of young entrepreneurs to make an impact on our planet's future. Inna, welcome to the Business for Good podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure to be talking with you. And I want to just start at the very beginning because many people do not have such an interesting welcome to the world story as you do. You were welcome to the world and then quickly left the world for a little bit and thankfully were resuscitated. But tell us what happened at the very beginning of your life here.
So I live in Israel now, but I wasn't born here. I was born actually in Ukraine in 1986. And 2 weeks after I was born, the Chernobyl nuclear reactor exploded, which was the largest in history nuclear disaster. And unluckily, I was one of the babies that got hurt from the negative effects of the explosion. I actually had a respiratory arrest and a clinical death. And my mom is a nurse. She approached my crib and she looked down and she saw me pale and blue and not breathing. And she was like, oh my God, the baby is dead. What do I do? And my father reminded her that she's a nurse. He said, you're a nurse, do something. And then thankfully she remembered and she gave me a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation until the ambulance came and saved my life. So I got a second chance in life. And I believe this second chance is a significant part of my drive toward making an impact or somehow changing the world for the best.
When did you come to think of that? So obviously now you are trying to make an impact. You're trying to do something good for the world. But you knew this story as you were growing up, as you were a kid and as a teenager. And were you thinking then, I'm going to use this second chance to do something good in the world, or did that come later?
So it all happened when I was a baby. So of course, as a baby, I wasn't thinking anything. I didn't even remember the event. But, when I was 4 years old, my family immigrated from the Ukraine to Israel, to a super small town called Akko in the north of Israel. And every time we would have like holidays with the family, or like, family gatherings, everybody would remind me that, and they say like, wow, it's so cool. You got a second chance in life. Like, everybody would talk about it like it's the most interesting gossip in town, or like the best story that they ever heard. And so growing up, I think it really kind of stuck in my mind in the way like wow, I know so many people and nobody got a second chance in life. I got a second chance in life. I should really do something good with it. But it was a little bit difficult to decide or to understand at that point, what can I do that will be good? Because I was in a super small town in Ukraine first, and I was a child. And then when I was 4 years old, still a child, we immigrated to a small town in the north of Israel that like was that small that it didn't even have like a shopping mall or a cinema, which is kind of a quite obvious elements to have in any city nowadays, I think. So I really wanted to make an impact, but I didn't understand how I can make an impact. And I think this is part of the reason that as I was growing up and getting ready to enroll to university, I chose to study political science, because I thought, okay, I'm from a small town, but if I go and become politician, like maybe, I can really make a change, maybe some peace in the Middle East. For now, it didn't work out so well, but not for Ukraine and not for Israel. But that was kind of the reasoning that I chose to study what I studied.
Wow. Yeah. Who would have guessed that where you were born and where you emigrated to would both be the political hotspots for things a few decades later. But
yeah.
So when you were thinking, well, maybe I want to try to solve the Middle East problem, or maybe you wanted to do something else, eventually you became a translator, right? And so you're working in the energy industry. What led you to that, and what gave you the spark of an idea that you were thinking, well, my expertise is in translation. Maybe I should start my own energy company.
So it wasn't exactly like that. So in Israel, when you study like a first degree, you can choose like 2 subjects for your first degree. So the 2 subject that I chose is political science, in the hope of, as we said, becoming this great politician. And the second was English language and literature. That was kind of the 2 main topics of the degree. And when I finished my university, at 21 years old, I was super surprised to find out that there was no lineup of politicians waiting to hire a young lady with a degree in English and political science. And, I had to find a job at this point. Okay, the studies are kind of done for now. And then I looked online and I saw an ad for an English Hebrew translator in a renewable energy company. So I said to myself, okay, I'll do it like as a temporary job, like I studied English, so I know English very, very well. So, until I can get my real dreams come true, maybe I go work as an English Hebrew translator to kind of earn your first real money. And although the company I went to work for wasn't exactly, let's say, my cup of tea, but I would say that the biggest advantage there was really that I got exposed to this whole, I would say, very interesting and wonderful world of renewable energy. And whereas, back then, wind energy and solar energy were like sectors that were super packed with competition, and there was not too much to innovate. Solar panels was like certain like basically panels that were produced in different countries to lower their costs, but like there wasn't too much that you could do or improve in terms of efficiency or working mechanism. And wave energy, according to all the scientists and engineers, actually could produce twice the amount of electricity that the world produces now, which is a super significant amount that can really become game changer. And what I found really intriguing and surprising was the fact that although it had such an immense potential, no company, no matter how big it was, no matter how much financial or human resources they had, wasn't able to make wave energy a reality. So that was kind of time period in my life that I guess very illogically said to myself, or naively said to myself, I don't have the money, I don't have the technical background, I don't have the contacts, let's make wave energy happen.
Okay, well, we'll definitely want to get into that. But first, let me ask why it is what you just said, because when we hear about renewable energy, we hear about wind and solar and maybe geothermal to some extent also, but it's very rare that, at least I hear people including wave energy in that. I hear people talking about we need better photovoltaics, we need better wind turbines. You never hear people, at least I don't, maybe I'm not in the right circles, but I never hear people talking about better ways to capture the energy that waves create. So let's just first talk about why is that? Like, why is wave energy not included as frequently as wind and solar or even geothermal? And then even getting to the idea of what is wave energy? Like, how do you capture the energy of a wave?
So among the companies that are developing or working to develop wave energy, it is high on the agenda, of course, how to capture wave energy and how to make it efficiently. I would say that it's not on the agenda how to do it, because it is even on the agenda of states and of like different organizations that are not like directly related to harnessing wave energy. It's less familiar than wind and solar. And the reason for it for being less familiar, at least for the time being, is the fact that most companies in the early days of wave energy that tried to develop it did it in a super complicated, super expensive, super like unreliable way. And instead of wave energy showing like success stories and like exciting new projects coming up to life, wave energy was mostly about like, some power plant built once in a blue moon, once in every 10 years. And usually this power plant broke down and everybody ended up super embarrassed, wanting to hide the failure. So that's kind of why wave energy didn't become as familiar, because there was no real success stories. 99% of the competitors in wave energy decided to go into the offshore. The offshore zone is like 4 or 5 kilometers into the sea. Once they decided to go there, that was kind of the beginning and the end of their story. It was too expensive there. You need ships, divers, underwater cables, and mooring. It was breaking down all the time. In the offshore, you have waves of 20 meters and even higher. And unfortunately, no man-made stationary equipment can survive the load of a 20-meter wave height.
Is that why they went offshore? Is because the waves are so much bigger offshore? Is that the reason?
Exactly. So the thought was interesting. The implementation was not so much, because in the offshore, you do have much higher waves than you have, let's say, on the coastline, because a 20-meter wave height on the coastline is a tsunami. So obviously we don't, and thankfully we don't see it very often. But yes, most of the people that kind of opened and established those companies were not entrepreneurs. They were mostly like engineers. And, they said to themselves, they didn't think about money, savings, and everything that's logical in a business. They were more thinking like, where is the biggest amount of power that I can harness to really show these wind and solar people how it's done. The problem is that, if you're going to a place that you're breaking down every 3 days and that you cost so much more than any element existent out there, you wouldn't have too many clients. You wouldn't be a success story. So I think that was a big mistake, and I'm a little surprised, to be honest, about this mistake, because if you look at the wind industry for the first 100 years was only building wind turbines on land, what is called onshore. It never went offshore. It took them 100 years to attempt to build the first offshore wind turbine, and it was built in Denmark. They waited to gain expertise in terms of technology, to gain the supply chain, the financial support. They waited to kind of do everything on the land, on the safe side. And as the time went by, and the time was 100 years, they only dared to go to the offshore, which they're building a lot of offshore turbines in the middle of the ocean right now. Wave energy, I don't know what happened to them. It was over optimistic. They said forget the 100 years development. Let's go offshore straight away. We don't have the money. We don't have funding. We don't have technical expertise. Let's go where it's the hardest. This to me doesn't make sense. And I think that's kind of the reason that we do hear about wind energy very often. And we're just starting to hear about wave energy.
And are those the reasons you decided to start your own company? I mean, as you mentioned, you were 24 years old. You had no engineering background. You had no entrepreneurial background. You had no money to start a company. And yet you decided, I'm going to quit my job as a translator. And instead, I'm going to start my own onshore wave energy company. What led you to think I might succeed at that?
I don't think I was thinking when I was 24, to be honest, too much. But, you have the naiveness. You have a very strong belief. But it didn't really happen at this kind of turn of events. What happened is that I quit the company first before I even had any idea or anything related to that. I found out that there's like a huge market, there's a huge demand for a product, for a reliable, cost-efficient wave energy product. And I saw that this demand is not being met by supply. You don't have to be genius to understand that if there's a huge demand and nobody supplies the product, if you can supply the product, it will be good. You don't need to be very engineering or entrepreneurial oriented kind of in order to understand that. So that's what kind of gained my attention from the first. There's a big need, there's a big market, yet nobody is using kind of that market and need or supplying that need. So I started researching like what is kind of the problem of all the companies, and I really found out that it's 5 same problems over and over and over again, which is cost, reliability, insurability, environmental impact, and difficulty to connect to the grid. So I said to myself, okay, all the companies that existed out there, again, no matter how much resources, technological background they had in the development, all of them failed in these 5 points. If I fix these 5 points, I'm catching the waves, kind of. No pun intended. So that's what I did. Like I started looking what's like similar between those companies, what different in those companies, like what you actually have to do in order to solve these 5 problems. That was my key focus. I wasn't able to do sketches and blueprints. I'm not an engineer, but I was able to think about like a product that would answer to this problem. And I did not have, it's not like I was 24 and had no money and I said to myself, okay, let's open a company, because I didn't have money to build a power station, not even to register a patent. So I did think about an idea, but for a while I put it aside. I thought to myself, okay, it's a great idea, good for you, but it's not really realistic because you don't have the money or anything else that's needed to kind of execute it. And then like at the social event, I met a serial entrepreneur. His name is David Leb. He really got excited about, wave energy in general. He was thinking about it in a completely different part of the world on his own as well. So kind of our meeting was kind of a match made in business heaven, and he ended up investing the first $1 million into the company. So I did not start the company with nothing. I started the company with an investor, 50% partner, that actually enabled, our initial research, patents, and everything that you need to do to open a company.
So you have this $1 million, you're getting started, and you decide that maybe instead of just trying to do everything on your own, you're going to do a contest, right? You want to get some designs. So where did you do this contest and what happened from it?
So I was really kind of scared, to utilize the money in a non-correct way or to spend too much, because, it's my first kind of entrepreneurial experience. And I really wanted, look, both of us, David and I, both of us are not engineers. And we had great ideas that seemed great on paper, but we didn't really know if they would work in real life, So I did put as kind of a priority to save as much cost as possible until the point that we know, okay, our idea is actually feasible. So instead of doing the initial kind of R&D and testing in Israel, I went back to Ukraine, to the same city where I was born, and I made a competition between like 300 engineers, giving them kind of, what's the product that we want, what do we want it to do, what limitations we don't want it to have, and like for them to offer their own kind of execution pathway to our idea. And then from this team, we chose a team of 5 engineers that kind of we believe that could assist us in making our concept a reality. And then we went on to test like a very, very small wave energy array, the first one that we ever built in the Hydromechanical Institute in Kiev. It's like a marine institute. And from there, we continued already to real conditions testing and so on.
So what is the actual technology that you all are using? So it's different from the technology that would be used offshore, as you mentioned, like 4 or 5 kilometers out into the ocean. What is the technology that you're working on?
So our technology is considered like a technology that is implemented in the onshore and nearshore zone. When I say onshore, I don't mean like prime real estate or like, Miami Beach coastline. I mean more existent structures such as piers, breakwaters, jetties, piers, and any other types of structures. The floaters connect to existing structures. They go up and down with the movement of the waves, pushing a hydraulic cylinder which transmits biodegradable fluid into land-located accumulators. A pressure is being built. The higher the wave, the higher the pressure, turning the hydromotor, turning a generator, and sending clean electricity into the grid. So yeah.
So how much can this do? I mean, we're going to include in the show notes for this episode at businessforgoodpodcast.com a link so you can see photos of these floaters that you're talking about. They're attached to something like a pier or something else on land, and the ocean water is moving. They're going up and down. How much energy can that actually generate? Like, are we talking about something that can power a city, or something that could power just the energy needed by the pier? Like, what is the quantity of energy that we're thinking about here?
So the good point about wave energy that it has about more than 800 times density of water than density of air. So you can produce much larger electricity amount with much smaller spaces and smaller devices. Like, as a rule of thumb, even if I compare to solar energy needs about 10 square meters per each 1 kilowatt of installed capacity. In Gibraltar, the first grid-connected power station that we built, we had an installed capacity of 100 kilowatt on a 20 square meters. On the same space, you could do 2 kilowatt of solar energy. So 50 times more installed capacity on the same space. So you can produce very significant amounts, like on a large breakwater of like 3 to 5 kilometers, which is a standard size of breakwater for a port. You can put about 50 megawatts of power of installed capacity. It's about 50,000 households, in simple words. So yes, you can produce significant energy amounts. It all depends on the space that you have available, and of course on the wave height and wave period, which is the resource from where you're harnessing your electricity.
Wow. So it sounds really encouraging, right? So you can have something that doesn't pollute, but there's obviously no fossil fuel that's used here, right? So you're creating clean energy. And one of the concerns about, let's say, offshore, as you mentioned, is degradation to the marine eco-habitat. Is there anything associated with that on onshore?
So we actually did for our Israeli project, which is the first ever in history grid-connected wave energy array that's connected to the national Israeli electrical grid. We actually performed a third-party environmental evaluation before building the project. The evaluation came back very positive. It showed that we have no impact on the marine environment. Our floaters do not connect to the seabed. They only connect to the existent man-made structures, which are usually basically cement or stone. Cement or stones are not exactly environmentally friendly when you just put them in the middle of the water, but ports and coastal cities have to build those in order to protect coastal communities and the ports, from storms and from dangerous weather conditions. So we take something that is not good for the environment and has to be built and actually turn it into a source of clean electricity. So no, there's not really negative impact there.
Okay, great. And so you mentioned in Gibraltar, you mentioned in Israel, you're working on a pilot program in the port of Los Angeles as well. How many of these do you have actually today that are providing electricity for some grid?
So far we built 2 grid-connected projects. One is in Gibraltar, second is in Israel. In Israel, we did it with the collaboration and co-investment from EDF, Électricité de France, which is the largest renewable energy developer in Europe and was the French national electrical company. And in the Port of LA will be our third one, and will be our first penetration to the US market, which we find the US market very, very exciting right now, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act and with all the goals that were set to decarbonize, kind of the United States. The fourth one that we will be building will be in Porto, Portugal. The fourth one will be actually our first commercial project. We just got all the licenses just a week ago. I was in Portugal. I just returned on Thursday. And it was amazing. We actually got approval for everything. We visited the site. We had an official kickoff meeting, and I believe the project in Portugal will not only be EcoWave Power's first commercial scale project, but first commercial scale project for the wave energy field as a whole. So a success of these projects means a lot, not only for EcoWave Power, but in my view, for the world.
Wow. Well, congratulations in advance on that. That certainly will be very encouraging to see you turning the tides for wave energy, pun intended there. But you mentioned the first $1 million, that came in. Obviously, you've needed more than $1 million to do all of this. So how did you go about fundraising after that first $1 million, and how much have you raised prior to the IPO that you had?
So the good thing about our technology that it's not really capital intensive, because we install on existing infrastructure, and because we're a technology company and not an execution, not an engineering company. So we don't have to have a lot of construction people on board, and mostly engineers for planning and supervising. So After the first $1 million, we did 2 fundraising rounds, 2 private rounds, 2 VCs basically invested. After that, in 2019, we went public for the first time on Nasdaq Stockholm. And the second time that we went public was on Nasdaq United States, Nasdaq Capital Markets in 2021, under the stock symbol WAVE, which we were very lucky that was available because we had to fight for it with another company. And we raised about, I would say, so far, a little bit in excess of $26 million.
Is $26 million enough, or do you need to continue raising into the future?
Look, so far, I think we were very smart and kind of cost efficient with the funding that we raised. That we did not come back to market to raise funding since 2021, which is very, very rare for a company that's actually doing R&D and developing a new product and building power stations, which is not a small thing usually, not to need a lot of capital all the time. So I'm very proud in the fact that we did not dilute any of our shareholders since 2021. We didn't have to come back for money. We have now cash on our balance sheet. We were able to be lucky and not to have to raise and dilute our shareholders also because of the fact that we did amazing strategic partnerships, as I said, in Israel with EDF, which is the French national electrical company. The Los Angeles project is co-funded by Shell, which is a huge, of course, energy company as well. In Portugal right now, we're also negotiating with a big infrastructure fund that would come in and fund the project at the kind of SPV at the project company level. So we also receive grants. We also receive a lot of support. So I think it really helps us to be able to do the most possible while providing our shareholders the best value.
How many folks work at the company now?
We have 12 people. We're not big company, mostly engineers. Right now, we will hire some more people because we're kind of splitting the operations of the company. EcoWave Power Israel will remain kind of the engineering hub. Israel is kind of the startup nation, and we're really, really good with our engineering. And the US is, the sales nation. So you're really good there in business development, sales, and so on. So in Miami, Florida, we're now opening offices, and we'll hire some more people for business development, for sales, and so on.
That's great. Is the company profitable, or are these partnerships that you're working on render the company profitable today?
So the company is not yet profitable. I don't think you can become really profitable with only making pilots. And the first step, no country, unfortunately, in the world will let you build a commercial scale, profitable, huge project without coming in with a pilot. And a pilot will never be profitable because you have kind of the same expenses, same unique expenses as a big power station, but it's on a much smaller scale of revenues. So right now, no, we're not profitable, but we finished last year, 2023, with net loss of around $1.8 million, which is not considered significant for the energy industry.
Right. Yeah. It's a very small amount to lose for that. So when you went public, I presume it was a great educational experience to learn what it's like to take a private company into the public sector. How are things changed for you now that you're publicly traded? Every day, are you going on and looking at Wave and seeing how you're doing? Are you looking at it every hour? Is there changes anything about what you say publicly? What's different now that you're running a publicly traded company?
I don't go look at it every day or every hour. I think that kind of CEOs or employees that get stuck on the stock price, they kind of lose sight of what's important. Because if you have a good product and you have a good technology, no matter how badly your stock does at a certain moment in time, it will catch up. And if your stock is doing amazingly, but your product is very bad, but people still haven't noticed, the same thing will happen. The stock will crash at a certain point. So I don't think the stock is really what's important. I put a lot of attention on operation, on delivering what we promise, on showing to the market that what we say is what we do, and that we value our shareholders, and that we're not there's some companies that come to the market and they keep raising more funds and more funds and more funds, and then the shareholders that invested end up with very little stock because they got diluted every time there was a fundraising round. So we really don't do that as a decision. The advantages and disadvantages of being public are also pretty clear. The disadvantage of it for a company our size, like an innovative company and a growth company, is the fact that it adds an additional kind of layer of something that you have to manage, because a funding entity is like its own product. You You don't need to communicate with the shareholders, issue reports. You have a lot of work that's associated with being public. So that's definitely not the positive side. But the positive side for us, for example, is that once we went public, we were able to close many more deals for projects and get licensing faster, because most of the time the projects and licensings and lands are owned by governments, municipalities, and so on, and they really like working with publicly traded entities because of the transparency involved. And so really, I think that's the big advantage for us. And I'm looking forward to showing our shareholders that we perform and that we do what we promise, and making them proud with in November, we're planning to have the big opening of the Israeli project. It was a bit postponed because of the war. We didn't do the official ceremony. Then soon we're planning to open the LA project and then the Portugal project. So I really think that our shareholders will be proud. Hopefully they would also become successful and see that it's a good decision, having EcoWave Power stock.
Let's certainly hope so. You sound pretty bullish on the company right now. Were there any times during the past decade plus that you've been running this where you thought that maybe this wouldn't work, that maybe this actually is not going to cross the finish line?
No. If I would think it's not going across the finish line, I don't think that I would be here today. And I don't think that I would be here today in a position saying to you that I never sold any stock. And the founders of the company currently hold majority of the shares of the company. So majority of the company is not public, it's private actually, by the founders. So the fact that both founders never sold anything, I think shows the belief throughout the time in the company. Yeah. And no, I really think that we have a good product. Sorry.
So you've never taken anything off the table, even after going public?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're betting big. I admire it. I admire your faith in the company. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Were there any resources, for you that were useful? You started as somebody who, as you self-described, didn't know much about running a company, and you've obviously learned a lot in more than a decade of doing so. Were there any resources that were useful for you that maybe somebody who's listening would think, oh, I really admire what she's done. I want to do something cool like that as well. Are there any things that you would recommend that a listener might check out?
I really liked, there's Sheryl Sandberg's book. It's very famous, and also TED Talk called Lean In, where she describes how it was for her, like as a female entrepreneur, and what she encountered in different kind of times of her career. So for female CEOs, future female entrepreneurs or managers or whatever, I would definitely recommend her TED Talk and her book. I really liked it. And I think what really also helped me was kind of inspirational stories that were similar to mine a bit. So for example, if you look at Jack Ma, one of the, I think the richest man in China, or was the richest man in China, I don't know the exact status. So
right, the founder of Alibaba.
Exactly. So the founder of Alibaba, he was a school teacher in his profession. Like he had nothing to do with the e-commerce or this type of software that they developed, and he became like a very, very successful entrepreneur with Alibaba. And there's a very known story about him that he tried to go and get hired in KFC chicken, and they didn't hire him. And he tried to go to Harvard 10 times, and he didn't get accepted. So it kind of gave me the belief that, wow, look, you don't have to necessarily have the background or, or finish some degree or anything in a field that you want to pursue. Sometimes, having a good idea and a lot of passion and persistence is enough.
Indeed. I actually one time found myself, I was in Silicon Valley, and I was at a Chinese restaurant, and I looked over at the table next to me, and Jack Ma was eating there with a couple people. And I couldn't believe that I was sitting so close to him. And I, of course, did not muster the courage to say anything to him, but I wish that I would have at least shaken his hand so I could have said that I did.
So similar thing happened to me. I was in a restaurant in Paris, and both of us were speakers in a conference, in the same conference. And I looked there and I saw Jack Ma is sitting in the corner of the restaurant. But as opposed to you, I went to him and I introduced myself. I gave him a business card. I would like to be honest and say that he never emailed anything. But it's not really related to the wave energy sector, so it's not very surprising. But you see, right. there's some similarities.
Maybe he would want to invest at least. But I appreciate that you had more courage to actually go talk to him, because I did not want to bother him. He was with a group of people, none of whom were speaking English. And
I'm Israeli. Bothering people for our needs is the chutzpah is in our blood.
Very good. Very good. Very good. So speaking of chutzpah, there are maybe people who are listening, who are thinking, I'd really like to start my own company, but frankly, I don't even know what I should do. Are there any things that you wish somebody else would start, either in the energy sector or anything that you don't yet exist that you wish that they would do?
I think there's so many things that really don't exist. Like, it's really a world of endless opportunities. Like, I'm sure that the whole energy sector would like to see better energy accumulation systems, because right now the ones that are available are either super large in size. Like, if you want to accumulate a significant amount of electricity, then it's super large in size and you don't really have where to put it, or it's super expensive. So that's something that I think that would really help to turn the world into a fully 100% environmentally friendly energy generating world. That's what comes from the top of my head. But even covering different needs of technologies that are doing good, but when they go out of kind of cycle, they don't do so good. So for example, with solar energy, I heard, again, that's not my niche and my field, but I heard many times that after a solar field stops operating after 20 or 25 years, the land on which it stood is kind of dead for 100 years. And there's nothing to do with the equipment that was standing on it. There's not really a good recycling option for solar panels, apparently. I didn't know that. Somebody from the industry told me. So maybe, I don't know, if a company would see that as a need and invent some way of recycling solar energy and making sure that it doesn't harm kind of the land on which it stands for that extended period of time. So I think there's a lot of big needs and wants in the energy and the renewable energy sector. And I think it's really one of the most critical sectors, because right now 60% of the global greenhouse gas emissions are from the way that we produce our energy. So I really would like to see more invention in the energy industry.
Great. Well, I do want to end back on nuclear here, because we started talking about the Chernobyl disaster, and you're talking now about some of the environmental side effects of clean energy, right? Of like solar panels and so on. A lot of the clean energy advocates have in recent years become great advocates for nuclear, thinking that this is going to be one of the key ways that we're going to power our civilization without fossil fuels. As somebody who was a victim of Chernobyl, what do you think? Have you come around? Are you in support of nuclear energy as a clean energy source, or would you prefer to stay away from it?
Well, that's, I would say, a hard question. On the one hand, nuclear, when nothing bad happens, when there's no explosion, problem, I don't know, anything of this sort, the nuclear does not really pollute. It doesn't have, it can produce a lot of energy, but does not really pollute. But then once something does happen, it pollutes for 100 years. Because for example, Chernobyl happened, I'm 38 now. So Chernobyl happened 38 years ago, because it happened 2 weeks after I was born. And till now, it did not clean up. You have still approximately 62 years to go for it to clean up, according to all the scientists. That's not a good thing. And if there would be only one problem like that happened, you can say, okay, that's a unique experience. But then something similar happened in Japan. They had a problem there with nuclear next to the water, which also scared everybody a little bit. So kind of, I don't know really what to say, because they have pluses, they have minuses, I think, everything in the world. And depends. If there's a way to make it 100% safe, do it. If it's very risky, I would prefer 100% renewable energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that those who are in favor of nuclear would say that none of these energy sources are 100% safe. As you mentioned, even solar has these downsides of environmental degradation. And so the question is, per kilowatt hour produced, how much risk is there? And the advocates of nuclear will say, well, if you look at how many hundreds of nuclear plants there are and how few problems there are with them, it's actually safer than many of the other options, and certainly safer than continuing to spew carbon dioxide into the atmosphere with coal and oil and gas and so on. So, it's tough, because making energy requires some sacrifices somewhere, and apparently not with onshore wave energy, but everything else. There seem to be some concerns.
Depending, depending which concern. There's a concern that really, they say solar, the land that solar is being put on is not useful for a big amount of time. But on the other hand, the land that is being put on, usually from the start, is not a land that's dedicated, let's say, to agriculture. So,
I think the bigger environmental concern about solar is the actual production of the photovoltaics. That the actual production of the panels is not so environmentally friendly. Of course, dramatically superior to using fossil fuels, needless to say. But there's always going to be trade-offs, and whether it's with wind turbines and the
and when you build a nuclear plant or a gas plant or an oil plant, you're not harming the environment. When you build like this huge, gigantic plant and with a lot of steel and cement and emissions.
I couldn't agree more, Inna. I couldn't agree more. There's trade-offs for everything. We have to figure out what are going to be the ways to do the least amount of harm with the energy that our civilization demands. So my hope is that eco-wave power will be producing a lot of the percentage of energy that civilization needs, and that I get to see your Los Angeles pilot when it is up and running and feeding into the grid. I'd love to go down there and be able to check it out and say, even though I never spoke to Jack Ma, I will one day be saying, hey, listen, one time I talked to Inna Braverman and I know her. And then people will say, oh, you got to give her my card for you. So that'll happen one day. You'll be the Jack Ma.
And I will email the people that gave me the card.
Very good. Very good. Well, Inna, thanks so much for all that you're doing. I really admire your journey and what you are accomplishing, and I wish nothing but the best for you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found it useful, and if you did, please let the world know. Leave the show a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app and share the episode with your friends. Who knows? Maybe you'll inspire one of them to be in the business of doing good themselves.